ready to start. We have Dr. Stephen Morrison coming up. Dr. Morrison is a researcher, instructor, and lecturer who worked with the Houston Police Department for 41 years. He is now with Harris County Precinct 4 Constables Office as a captain in the Reserve Division working and training. He has researched interests in parental alienation and related justice system issues, and also teaches undergraduate and graduate courses at the University of Houston downtown, and also Sam Houston University. He is author of Reliability of the Five-Factor Model for Determining Parental Alienation, which is now called the Baker Model, which was published in 2021 in the American Journal of Family Therapy.
Basically, you've already touched on my background. And we'll go to the next slide. I think it's important for me to share with you the parental alienation, my dissertation. Basically, in 1993, I went through a divorce and was a target parent and didn't know that for about 8 years. And then I came across parental alienation and the work of Dr. Gardner. And in his work, he had indicated that there was a lack of quantitative research on parental alienation. And so when I had the opportunity to participate in the PhD program out of the University of Southern Mississippi, I asked if that I could write on parental alienation. And the professor said, well, what does that have to do with the criminal justice system? And I said, well, it passes through the family court. And he said, okay, that's good. And so from then on, every bit of my work revolved around all the papers that I created and wrote, assignments and what have you, dealt with parental alienation. And I've continued that practice of staying abreast with parental alienation now for probably about 24 years. You want to go on to the next one? Basically, that's some of my publications, and the most recent one is the Reliability of the Five-Factor Model for Determining Parental Alienation. And we'll go over that a little bit later in this presentation. Go on to the next one. And one thing to share with everybody is that I've created this as a PDF so that you can have a copy of this, as well as another PDF that corresponds with this that will list the 8 manifest behaviors and the 17 strategies and some other resources so that you can increase your knowledge on parental alienation. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my knowledge of parental alienation, and then talk about the goal of reducing those high conflict cases and how we can address those, and the use of mental health professionals and reducing that conflict that occurs in the family courts. We'll go to the next one. I think it's important for us to understand that, or look at, when we have a death of a family member, we reach out to grief counselors. We have the pastors at the church that come in and help us address that issue. When a divorce occurs, whoops, you moved on. There we go. When a divorce occurs, we don't really address it with mental health professionals. Lawyers are utilized to dissolve the marriage. We have conflict that continues to occur. That court, the family court, becomes a competitive arena. It is very expensive, and it saddens me when I think about the expense of it all, that those that are in the lower income brackets have less access to the family courts. Then if we have an amicus that we add or a mediator, it just runs the bill up. I went out and did a little bit of looking and found that from 1970 to date, there have been 648 children shot and killed in the schools. And then I was interested in that also what happens when the divorce occurs, how many parents have murdered themselves and their children, and or committed suicide and murdered their children during the divorce. And from 2008, I have 985. We are doing our very best to address the schoolhouse shootings, but I think we're falling short in addressing the incidences that occur out of divorce and separation. Okay, we can go on and move to the next one. Just a little bit of some history of our family court. Basically, when a marriage occurred, it occurred in the church in the early years. Divorce was forbidden, and it wasn't until 1910 that a family court was established up in New York, and that the primary reason it was established was to address the legal issues, how to divide up property, and moved on into where we have today. 1969, we introduced the no-fault divorce, and when we did that, the suicide rate dropped. Today, the family court works under the rules of the family code. Members of the court are educated on legal matters and process, but I think that the majority of them fall short on mental health issues and mental health management. Let's go ahead to the next one. Family courts, the function is to divide the marital assets. Judges are elected. They're elected for a 4-year term. Their primary knowledge is that of law, family law, and there's no criteria to be a judge except to just be a lawyer. And so if you ask me, it kind of falls short of having an education in regards to the mental health issues that are a part of parental alienation. And so I asked that question down there in the bottom, why don't we have mental health practitioners to assist the court? And when I get into the last part of this presentation, I'll talk about a program that's up in Connecticut that I believe is helping out in addressing the mental health issues. We'll go to the next. As I was thinking about the different perspectives on parental alienation and the different terms, there was kind of a parallel with the idea of criminology, where we're trying to explain why man commits crime. There's schools of thought out there that believe it's biological, and there's others that think it's psychological, and there are some that are believe it's sociological. And I think if we stop and back off a little bit, all of those all have some component of criminological thought. Well, that's the same thing with parental alienation. Over the 24 years that I've been exposed to it, seeing the different schools of thought, and parental alienation is there. We just have to come together as a group and try to move on instead of arguing over what we're going to call it. Let's go on to the next slide. And there are the different terms that I was able to pull up. Parental alienation syndrome, which was coined by Dr. Gardner. And parental alienation had been seen before and written about before his time, which was in the middle of the 1980s. Then we had the group that wanted to drop off the name syndrome because they didn't think it applied. And syndrome is a medical term, and academia was applying their term to it. So there were arguments on whether or not we should call it syndrome. So we've stopped and started calling it parental alienation. And I have another mental health professional who calls it attachment-based parental alienation. And then we have another who calls it parental estrangement. And then we have hostile aggressive parenting. And basically the way I see it is we're all seeing parental alienation. We just haven't totally agreed on what we're going to call it, which kind of distracts or detracts from us working with the family courts and trying to address the mental health issues that come out of children who are caught up in the violations of and abuse that occur during the divorce. We'll move on to the next slide. And that's a definition that comes out of the book that you were shown just a little while ago by the previous presenter. A mental condition in a child, usually whose parents are engaged in a high conflict separation or divorce, in which the child allies strongly with one parent and rejects a relationship with the other parent without legitimate justification. And we'll go on to the next slide. And just over this past month in Romania, they've created a law which defines it. However, they're using the word parental estrangement. And we'll go on to the next one. And from my perspective, what I believe here or see is that parental alienation is induced. That rejection of the once loved parent comes from that alienating parent and induces that. And how they induce that rejection is via the 17 strategies Those strategies are written about by Dr. Amy Baker, and I've attached those in a separate PDF so you can know what the 17 strategies are. Another issue is that of relocation. One parent will set out and move as far away from the other parent as they can. There's a psychologist out of Florida, Dr. Arthur Catt, and he wrote about that, as well as Richard Gardner, where relocation is a strategy to keep the children away from the other parent. And then that aspect of reporting false abuse. And why does the reporting of false abuse occur? Is because you target that parent and attack that parent. And so if you use false abuse, it downgrades them when they go to court so that they don't have, they have to explain themselves. They've been a target in this, and it also requires CPS to remove the child until the investigation is complete. So it's furthering that strategy of separating the child from the target parent. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Again, parental alienation syndrome was coined by Dr. Gardner in the 1980s. Some claim it as junk science. If you go out there on the internet right now and do a little bit of search the term Google junk science, they'll talk about it. There's even articles that are very recently have been written, still continue to call it junk science. And I approach that by explaining that those persons aren't educated on research methodology. There's a research method called grounded theory, and basically we collect data every day, and we take that data and can go into that data set and take a look to see if there's any relations. We're not actually conducting research, and we're just collecting data. Then we want to come back after it and see if there is any relationships that falls under the grounded theory. And each of the occasions in which a child comes in and goes through a custody evaluation, that evaluator collects a custody evaluation, and that custody evaluation is an example of qualitative data. It's a qualitative data set, and so their data is out there from each of those custody evaluations. And what happened with Gardner, he had collected a bunch of custody evaluations. He saw a relationship occurring between those custody evaluations, and he wrote about that relationship, and that's exactly how the grounded theory works. The next part of my slide there is that PA is not in the DSM, and come back with that argument, which is first, the chicken or the egg, and it's just taken us a while to bring it into the DSM. We'll get there. Emotional abuse is in the DSM, where we're dealing with the semantics of whether to call it a syndrome. That's the medical definition versus the academic definition. And then also a part of this, and I've seen this also emerging, is the politics and those egos that are out there in regards to naming rights. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's parental alienation. And let's settle with that and move on. And we'll go on to the next slide. Something else that is, I think that is important to understand, especially for the judges that are out there. An attorney will argue that there's no such thing as parental alienation one day in court, and then the next day he represents a different client and comes into the court and argues that parental alienation does occur and is occurring. So their position on the existence of PA depends on the client they represent. And I think that's created a lot of the confusion that we have presently and are dealing with, is because we have those attorneys that come in and argue that it doesn't, and then the next day argue that it does. It is child abuse, it's emotional abuse, and the judges have the authority to address that. If they have the knowledge of what's going on, they need to intervene. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. And basically what I've done on this slide here is divided up some of the different schools of thought in regards to parental alienation today. I have some of the work on the left column there under, it's Dr. Craig Childress, and he calls the alienating parent the savior. He calls the child that's being abused the victim, and the abusing parent, he calls that person the villain. He has a good YouTube video that's worth listening to. Childress was involved in working with children who were actually abused, and then he transitioned over to working with children under parental alienation, and he has great insight into the difference between the two. Gardner called it alienating parent as the one that is inducing the parental alienation. And then we have the target parent, who's, like I said, with Childress, is conveyed as being the villain, the bad person. They are attacked throughout the whole process of parental alienation. Everything that they do is conveyed as being wrong. It's misconstrued some way or another to present them as a bad person. And then you have the child and the children that are caught in the middle. And if you're looking for trying to see that child, if you know what the 8 manifest behaviors are, which those are coined by Richard Gardner, you can start to see the parental alienation and understand what's happening. And you do have to be tuned to those 8 manifest behaviors. If you don't know what they are, you won't see parental alienation. Something else that Childress talked about was abuse being a delusion, where that parent induces the abuse. And I think that one of the examples that was given in one of the previous presentations about Lostrow, Dr. Lostrow, who was shot and killed as he sat in his car by his child in the back seat, where the mom was encouraging the shooting to take place. All of that was because he had the delusion that he was being abused, and that delusion was planted by his mom. When the two people share the same delusion, it's called folie à deux. Also under Childress, he talks about the attachment system, which I think that's very important. And there was some talk a while ago about how to deal with children that are being abused and separating them from the parent. I think that's a good idea to take them away from the abuser, and you're not going to cut off their attachment to that parent. It's still going to be intact and it'll still be there, but you'll give some healing time to take place so that the children can connect back up with their parent that's the target parent, and then after a period of time you can allow them to come back together. And all of that needs to be done under mental health practitioner supervision so that they can work with all of them working together to try to move that family back together. All right, we'll go on to the next slide. One of the things that Childress pointed out was what he called normal range parenting. And the target parent falls under that the abuse, neglect. And basically what's happening is the alienating parent is trying to push all of the things that take place, all the behaviors of the target parent, and convey them as being abusive and push them outside of the normal range parenting. And we'll go on to the next slide. Dr. Craig Childress indicates 3 diagnostic indicators. Attachment system suppression. The child calls the parent by the first name and not dad. That's one of the symptoms that attachment is being kind of destroyed. The child will reject the parent, and that parent being in the normal range parent. Each of us have our own set of values on how we discipline our children, and what happens with the target parent is sometimes their discipline is being conveyed as being abuse, and that's the whole one of the parts of parental alienation. Dr. Craig Childress listed out 5 narcissistic personality traits in the child. The grandioso judging of the parent. There's a sense of entitlement, and there's a lack of empathy for that parent. There's a haughty or arrogant attitude towards that parent. And then we have splitting, which is the demonization of that parent. Victimization is trauma reenactment. It's a fixed and false belief. It's a delusion, and it is a good source, Dr. Craig Childress, to learn a little bit more. It's not seen as authentic child abuse. Move on to the next slide. One of the other things that Dr. Childress said is that we'll see in that child is the parent's fingerprints all over that child. Where we talk about the apples in the tree, he describes the fingerprints as being a part of that child, and we'll see those behaviors emerge, the narcissistic behaviors, the lack of empathy, grandioso. We'll start to see those emerge in the child when the child is being alienated. We'll move on to the next one. Just reiterating that fact that parental alienation is emotional abuse. Children have an attachment to each of their parents. This is where grief kicks in if one parent is lost or dies, or any of our friends. We all have that attachment. Under Childress, the attachment system is suppressed, and like I said, one of the children might call the parent by their first name instead of calling them dad or mom. It is the creating of the narcissistic personality traits also. I call that a personality disorder. He has what we call the psychiatric delusion, the false belief that they are a victim. One of the things in parental alienation is that target parent is under attack. And like I've said earlier in this, is that everything they have done or are doing is somehow characterized as being wrong and abuse. Creates stress. The parenting skills are under attack. The parent feels like they're walking on eggshells. They can't come in and address any kind of the issues that need to be addressed in regards to discipline. And basically what happens is they're lowering some of the standards they're giving the children. I guess what we would say is creating our juvenile delinquents that occur in the future because they're taking away the boundaries. I'll move on to the next slide. And I just wanted to put this in here. And if you're from Texas, and I know that we're have a greater group that we're reaching out to today, but the Family Code in Texas says that anybody, which includes the lawyers, the mental health practitioners, and the judges, it's their duty to report child abuse. Parental alienation is child abuse. If it's occurring in the court, they also, as far as I'm concerned, should be required to be reporting it. Move on to the next slide. One of the difficulties in regards to addressing parental alienation, if the psychologist doesn't understand what parental alienation is, if they can't see it, if they can't recognize it, what they're going to do is make things worse. I was watching yesterday a presentation by Wayne Dolcefino, which is a journalist here in the Houston area, and he was bringing to light some issues going on in the family courts in Austin, Texas, in which there's a psychologist over there who's abusing their psychological degree in regards to court. As far as I'm concerned, it becomes about money, and that's what he was pointing out, that dragging things out and not knowing what parental alienation is, that they're actually creating things, they're making things worse. You have to be educated on PA. You need to know what the 17 strategies are, and you need to know what the 8 manifest behaviors. It's really pretty incredible. If you go down to the ballpark and watch the kids playing there, you'll see from time to time a child turn and wave to their parent. They're looking for affirmation. Do you see me out here? But when parental alienation occurs, when that parent that's being alienated walks by that ballpark, that dugout, that child won't turn because they're displaying that they have to display allegiance to their mom or their dad, the alienating parent. It requires good forensic interviewing skills. You can't ask questions. They have to be open-ended so that you let the child answer, and what you'll find in those answers from the child is usually they are answers that have been planted by the alienating parent. Something else, and this was talked about in Gardner's work, is what's called the garden path, where that alienating parent knows what the answer should be and knows how to answer to the psychologist when they answer questions, so they're not really getting down to the bottom of what's going on, because that alienating parent has taken the psychologist down the garden path. They don't know or recognize PA, they can perpetuate the abuse, and they can hinder resolution. Move on to the next slide. I talked about just a little while ago about boundaries. One of the aspects of an alienating parent is that they'll entice the child by reducing boundaries, so that the child will come over. That's the rules that go on in a particular house, the discipline rules. We go to bed at 8:30. When they go over to the other parent's house, the other parent may let them stay up all night, and so they're enticed to go over and stay up all night and watch movies instead of creating that foundation for tomorrow. Another aspect is the court orders. By not following those court orders, it demonstrates non-compliance, and the children learn to be non-compliant and do whatever they want. They don't have to go by the rules. We need to watch how we address those boundaries. Both parents and as the psychologist, they need to look to see what the boundaries are and who's reducing the boundaries, because it will help them in determining who's being an alienating parent. Move on to the next slide. So how can we determine if PA is occurring? Go on to the next slide. And we have what we call the 5-factor model. And basically, during the year 2001, working with Dr. Burnett, we had some conversation about the 5-factor model and it needing to be tested. So I put together 6 scenarios and sent those out to approximately a little over 1,000 different mental health professionals here in the United States and outside the United States. It was to determine what we call an inter-rater reliability study. We're looking for the rate of agreement between those who evaluate the scenarios. And we'll move on to the next one. These are the 5 factors: a breach in the relationship, and we'll also call it the Baker model. And not basically what happened is Amy Baker created the 4-factor model. And then Dr. Burnett attached one more factor to it and made it the 5-factor model. And so today we're going to call it the Baker model. Factor 2, a prior positive relationship between the child and the parent whom the child is currently rejecting. And if you're a psychologist, one of the best ways to make that determination is to ask for pictures that exist, family pictures that exist prior to the divorce, and to see if there was that prior positive relationship. The absence of abuse or neglect or serious deficient parenting on the part of the now rejected parent. And I talked about the normal range parenting. When we fall outside of that, that's something a psychologist should be able to detect. So if we have abuse, then that can be dealt with. But if we don't see abuse, we know that that's one of the factors here. And factor number 4, evidence that the favored parent has engaged in many of those 17 primary parental alienation strategies. And like I said, I've listed those in one of the PDFs that's attached to this presentation today that I'm sharing with everybody. Factor 5 is evidence that the child is exhibiting any of those 8 behavioral manifestations of alienation. It doesn't mean that you have to have all. It's just that if you exhibit some of those, it's understanding what those 8 manifest alienating behaviors are, and those were observed by Dr. Gardner and put together by Dr. Gardner. Go on to the next slide. Just continuing on with some of the what the 5-factor model was about. Mental health practitioners, they need a reliable assessment tool. So basically I sent out, like I said, to mental health practitioners. There was 6 scenarios. The 5-factor model contains 5 criteria, and we were looking for rates of agreement, yes answers. And on the vignettes, then, like I said, there were 6 scenarios or vignettes that were sent out. And then the results in looking for the relationship in the regards to the answers given by those that responded. For the interclass correlation coefficient, we had a 0.92. And then for the Cronbach alpha, we had a 0.92. And basically we're saying that it's kind of like there's a 90% agreement. Whenever they read the scenario, they determined as parental alienation was there or wasn't there and answered the same. And basically what we can say out of the research is that the 5-factor model is a valid assessment tool for determining PA. That is, if you, the mental health practitioner, are aware of what the 17 strategies are and also aware of what the 8 manifest behaviors are. I'll go on to the next slide. A little bit more about the results. 37% of those who responded to case 1 lived outside of North America. I think that's important that we understand it isn't something that's just occurring in the United States. It is a global phenomenon. It occurs in other countries in which one parent will do their best to destroy the relationship between the child and the other parent. 38 were from the US, 7 from Canada, 2 from South America, 8 from Europe, 4 from Asia, and 1 from Africa. And the question was, are you familiar with parental alienation? And I had a 95% or 58 said yes, with 3 stating no. So there is a good knowledge of parental alienation being out there. It has, we have learned what it is, and it's being shared elsewhere. All right, we move on to the next slide. Research on parental alienation, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what's taken place. There's 937 qualitative publications. These are publications in regards that are written. We're using written data instead of numerical data, which is what's required in quantitative research. Number 1 alienating strategy is bad mouthing. And so it's that, how do you measure this? We have to understand when the bad mouthing is occurring, it's occurring between the parent and the child outside of anybody else. So it's a very hard thing for us to see. The only thing that we can do as a researcher is see the results, and that comes from those 8 manifest behaviors. Some examples of things that might take place, comments made by an alienating parent. Your dad didn't come to your program for school tonight. I guess he doesn't care about you. And so that parent has planted that seed that that parent doesn't care. If your mom cared about you, she would have taken you to the doctor. Your dad called and said he can't pick you up this week. And I put in there in parentheses that he's stuck over at work. And then the next comment that comes out of the parent's mouth is, guess he doesn't care about you. And so again, that seed is planted. Your mom is sick and going to die. God doesn't like mean people. You can see the results of the bad mouthing if you understand what the 8 manifest behaviors are. All right, we'll go on to the next slide. In regards to conducting research on parental alienation, it's very difficult because you can't be sitting there, you can't observe it when it's occurring, you can only see the results unless the target parent can capture the moment, and they do that to me with video and audio. And I would tell you that I used video and audio when I went through my divorce, and I captured some moments there that I was able to take into court and prove up that alienation was occurring. Another aspect of parental alienation and trying to conduct research on it, we're trying to measure abstracts. This is like anger. We all know what anger is, but how do you measure anger? And each of us have our own different view of different levels of anger, so it makes it a little bit difficult to measure that abstract. One of the things that happens is we lose loyalty. A child will have to show loyalty to one parent, and it goes away from the other parent. The target parent loses their loyalty, respect, there's defiance, there's rebelliousness, and there's affirmation. And all of those are abstracts. We know what they are, but how do you measure those? And it makes it difficult. If you know, like I said, what the 8 manifest behaviors are, you'll have a little bit of a better chance of of determining what's going on. Affirmation is really a very good telltale sign where that child is looking for that parent to affirm a behavior. They come in from school, they were presenting their schoolwork. Look at what I got today at school. I got an A, I got a B on this for a grade, and they're looking for that parent to say, good job, where when the alienation comes in, that affirmation tends to go away. So if you know what, like I said, the 8 manifest behaviors, you'll be able to see some of this occurring and be able to determine if PA is occurring. All right, go on to the next slide. I put this in here because as we part of today's presentation is to go into trying to figure out some solutions on how to address parental alienation in a family courts. The Hawthorne effect is a research term, and basically what took place during the 1930s was a study conducted on a business to determine they were trying to create better productivity out of their employees. And so they had different kinds of lights that they installed in the business to see if the lights facilitated any kind of improvement in productivity. And they didn't get any difference between in regards to productivity. And what they come back to determine was the fact that when a person is being watched, their output is changed. And that's what was taking place. That's what the Hawthorne effect is about. So if you know that you're being watched, you'll change your behavior. So let's move on to the next slide, and I'll incorporate how that works into the collaborative divorce project. When I was working on my dissertation, I came across this study that took place in 2005 in Connecticut, where the family court up there created a support services division, and they looked at 161 divorcing families with children who participated in the project, and they also had a control group. So we have 2 different groups that we're looking here, and we're looking for the differences between the 2. We'll move on to the next slide. Each family was assigned 2 co-parenting counselors, and this is kind of something that I'm going to carry on into maybe how we can address this here in Texas, because I know that it's not really prevalent. Each family was assigned 2 co-parenting counselors, which was a team. So basically, when the divorce occurs and you're entering into the family court, you're also assigned a mental health practitioner. And what they did was assign 2, one who worked regularly in the courts and one who was had a PhD and was outside of the courts. The counselors provided information and advocacy of the children on behalf and consulted with mental health and financial issues germane to the case, and helped manage the case if it got bogged down in the legal system. All right, move on to the next. And so there was 5 or 6 steps here, and we'll go through those as to what this project entailed. In the beginning, when you entered into the family court system, they had an orientation that took place where you were introduced to the judge, the lawyers, and the mediator, and the co-parenting team. And just coming back to what's the co-parenting team, that's the 2 counselors. Basically, they were assigned to the court so that, like I said, anytime or each of the divorcing cases that came in had mental health practitioners present. The next step was a co-parenting education class, orientation in regards to families of divorce. There were 2 sessions. If it was a higher conflict, they were required to attend other 4 additional weeks of educational training. We'll go on to the next slide. Thank you. 4, when back up 1. There we go. After getting together with the families, they had a feedback session. Following the completion of the classes, the couples met privately with the parenting co-counselors to hear individualized feedback about the child's particular developmental needs given the context of the unique family situation. The next step was the, and I said next, there we go, therapeutic resolution sessions, and which was mediation focused, but it also included those mental health practitioners to work through the controversy and to help resolve some of the issues in regards to parenting. We'll go to the next slide. Then there was a conference that took place under what's called status and settlement, which for families who did not reach an agreement. That status conference was arranged by the co-parenting counselors to include both parents, their lawyers, and a judge. If the settlement was not reached and did not appear imminent at the conclusion of the meeting, additional mediation was offered to the couple. And then the follow-up meeting was offered by phone or in person 18 months after the beginning of the intervention, which averaged between 9 and 11 months post-divorce for most families. And I think what's really important in this particular research project was that aspect of assigning mental health practitioners to each of the parents who entered into the divorce process. All right, and this is the results going out there and surveying those that were a part. Positive evaluations from both parents, intervention families benefited through lower conflict. There was also greater father involvement and better outcomes for children than the control group. Attorneys, this is still continuing on. Attorneys and courts of records indicated that the intervention families were more cooperative, less likely to need custody evaluations and other court-ordered services. The Collaborative Divorce Project illustrates how preventative programs can be located within the courts, and I think that's very important because we have judges that come and go every 4 years or maybe in there for a longer period of time, depending upon if they're elected. If we have a program that exists within the courts who's knowledgeable about what's going on, then it can be addressed and the judge can be acclimated to what's happening within the court when they begin presiding over that particular court. Can aid in helping the legal system function optimally for families with young children. All right, we'll move. Well, let's see. While researchers have made significant gains over the past 25 years in understanding the reactions and outcomes for the children of divorce, we have barely scratched the surface in our exploration of the role in the legal process of separation and divorce plays in affecting family outcomes. 40 years later, what has occurred to improve this process? We still have, and most recently been a part of going into the family court myself. There was no mental health practitioners assigned to help address any of the issues. Became only the lawyers dealing with it and then sending you to the outsiders to address the potential for parental alienation. And if they sent you to the wrong psychologist or mental health practitioner, they could do more damage because of that sending to somebody who didn't know what was going on. Have to educate the decision makers, our legislative members. I know that was brought up earlier today, to reach out to them. The judges and the lawyers and the mental health practitioners, make them much more aware. We'll go on to the next slide. And I'll tell you what, if we can back up one more, want to make one more comment here. That's okay. Let's move on to the next slide. I'll come back to it. All right, this is just an example case here where the court intervened, and I call it an anonymous case. The alienating parent was reported repeatedly violating the custody orders by keeping the children from the target parent. She was summoned and appeared before the judge on several occasions. The judge became tired of that was occurring, and she because of the contempt that was going on, she had the alienating parent locked up for 30 days in jail. When that alienating parent was released from jail and being monitored, she is now a cooperating parent and respecting those custody orders. And I know we don't want to lock somebody up, and I agree with that. We're dealing with family matters, but at the same time, we're dealing with child abuse, and you need to stop the child abuse. And if that's what it takes to stop the child abuse, then as the judge in that particular case, need to make that decision and create compliance. And if you have to lock them up, then you have to lock them up. Let them know they got to comply with the orders. Go on to the next slide. And again, the Hawthorne effect, if we're being watched, will change our behavior. And then I went back out and looked Again, that research that I just talked about took place back in 2005. And what has Connecticut done? That's where that research took place. They now have domestic violence division, and under that domestic violence division, they have family court services. So we have domestic violence divisions here in Harris County. Basically, what needs to be done is create a family court services so that we can manage that conflict. And like I said, there was over 900 children that have lost their lives because of divorce. And if we can get in there with our mental health practitioners, we might be able to address it. Each of the cases now that come into Connecticut are triaged, and they're looking to see what each case requires, and those that don't require very much. There's 3 tracks, and what they call the A track, the B track, and the C track. But I did kind of bold that aspect there that family courts, family counselors are utilized throughout the whole process. And that whole process focuses on the needs of the children. Move on to the next slide. Oops, I think you went to the A-track cases are basically the non-adversarial. They can waive the statutory waiting period. They're in and out. Basically, children aren't involved in these. We'll go on to the B-track. The next slide. B-track and C-track, if they're determined to be have children and that there's custody issues, then they could be placed into these 2 different tracks. Family services address concerns such as child custody, child access, financial matters, property disputes, and temporary restraining orders if they're necessary. Alternative dispute resolution services such as early intervention programs, general case management, pretrial settlement negotiation and conciliation, mediation, and conflict resolution conferences take place, and all of that is in an effort to reduce the docket and get the cases through there and address the mental health issues so that they can deal with the high conflict cases. I'm going to the next slide. And there are those occasions when the parents cannot reach an agreement regarding their parenting dispute. The family services conducts an issue-focused evaluation, and this, again, these are the mental health practitioners that are part of the family court. They look and do comprehensive evaluations, intensive case management services. Parenting plans are created that are focused on the best interest of the children and then recommended to the parents and the court. Move on to the next slide. So basically in Connecticut, they're court-based employees. So that means that in 4 years, when the judge moves on, that family service employee is still there or may still be there unless they're looking for a job somewhere else. But it keeps that knowledge. If they're trained on parental alienation, they're able to address what's going on. The next 2, the counselors, both of those, the lead family relations counselor and a family relations counselor, both of those having knowledge of PA can help reduce some of that conflict. They also have family intake assistance and support staff, and that's the Family Court Services Judicial Branch coming out of Connecticut. Did a little bit of looking here in Texas, and I found that some of this seems to exist in Tarrant County. That's going to be up by Fort Worth. They have a family services program that comes under their domestic violence that they address up there in Tarrant County. I didn't find anything in Harris County that had any kind of similar aspect of addressing the high conflict cases at all. Let's move on to the next. This is talking about Tarrant County and Harris County. We do have a domestic relations office. The mission statement is the family court service assists parents in minimizing conflict. The difference, counselors are not assigned to the cases from the beginning, and there's no triage that occurs here in Harris County. Judges and enforcement, the decision dilemma, they don't want to penalize or the order violations. And like I was saying, that sometimes you have to make those hard decisions. We're dealing with abuse. It's hard for them to sort out who's the villain and who's the savior, who's the target parent and who's the alienating parent. Who's being attacked. The target parent is usually having to explain everything that's going on. everything that they have done that's conveyed some way or another as being improper. They're also painted as being an unfit parent. Need to be educated on PA. That should help. It should be required. And one of the things that I hear regularly from attorneys is that that particular order is not enforceable. And it's like, why do we have the orders if we're not going to enforce them? Coming back to what the judges can do, contempt is a $500 fine or 6 months in jail. Defer to mediation still leaves the mental health issues unresolved. We're not addressing the mental health issues if they defer it to mediation. And I think some judges defer things to mediation because they don't want to address the issue themselves, make that hard decision as to what needs to be done, or maybe they can't see the parental alienation themselves. So again, like I said, they defer it to mediation. Move on to the next slide. This is something that occurred to me in the way of a thought. We have traffic enforcement officers that are out there that enforce traffic laws. We have court orders that are issued by the judge, interference with custody, and how are we addressing that? We don't have anybody that's addressing that. Needs to be absolute knowledge of PA, this particular court enforcement officer, and I'm just giving this as a thought, as a way to manage this or address this. They monitor for conflict. If there's conflict that's reported to them, and I would suggest maybe via email, then they can begin to observe what's going on and give notice to that particular violator. And if that violator continues violating, then they can be required to come into court, just like you issue a traffic ticket, come in and explain to the judge, give them 30 days to appear and answer as to what's going on. And I see that as an alternative to having to go out there and pay for an attorney trying to address the violation of court orders. We'll go on to the next one. Appearance, like I said, occur in 30 days before the court. Let the court be presented with what's going on, and that the judge enforces orders. In that process, he's stopping the abuse. When you're being monitored, and this is, like I said, with the Hawthorne effect, most respond by staying within the boundaries that are created by those rules created by the judge. Still have the possibility of those extreme cases occurring, but perhaps we can reduce it, especially if we have the mental health practitioner who's assigned to deal with it when they enter into the court and deal with those issues of anger and scorn and the hostilities. Move on to the next one. Again, assigning that mental health practitioner, I see that as a very valuable approach to dealing with this, and that transition of judges moving in and out. If we have mental health practitioners assigned to the court who are knowledgeable of PA, then perhaps we can reduce some of the conflict that's occurring and address some of the issues that are violations. We'll move on to the next one. Just an example here of thought. One violation, you get a written notice, and second, you have to appear before the judge. Third, you face incapacitation, which is being locked up. If there's no punitive action, they're not going to follow the orders. So it's up to the judge to create that punitive action to deal with the problem. Just a recent story here. This took place in San Antonio on March 19th. The mom and dad were in the midst of a divorce, and she went out and committed suicide and killed her 3-year-old son. And again, I'm pointing out that since 2008, 985 children have been murdered by divorcing or separating parents. Go on to the next slide. Educate yourself, and some resources with books and YouTube, and I've listed some of those that we'll start to go through here. PA is child abuse, and mental health practitioners, the judges and lawyers need to understand that. And again, that Hawthorne effect, just reiterating that when we're being watched, we alter our behavior. And I think if the judge lets that alienating parent know that they're being watched, that they'll alter their behavior. I realize that's not an absolute for all of the cases that are out there. But anyway, it's a good starting point. On this particular slide, I've just listed all of the journal articles that are out there. And I say all of them. I've just listed, I think, 7 of them here. And I'm sure if I went out and did a little bit more research, all of those journal articles call parental alienation child abuse, emotional abuse. That's Gardner's book that he wrote that began discussing parental alienation, in which he talks about the 8 manifest behaviors. Go to the next, divorce casualties, and I'm going to list through here some books that I think are good to go out and expand your knowledge on parental alienation. International Handbook of Parental Alienation. This one was presented a little while ago, The Parental Alienation Science and the Law. It's another good book. This is a very good book to read here. It's very up to date. It even talks about where parents dealing with cell phones, and it's a good book to read. This is by Amy Baker also, in which she discusses the 17 strategies. This is Dr. Craig Childress, where he talks about attachment-based model of parental alienation. It's a very good source. Dr. Warshak wrote this book on divorce poison. It's a good book also. And I put the slide in here to stop that flow of poison and address the alienating parent. You're not ending the parent-child relationship. You're stopping the abuse. If there's a 90-day disconnect, and we have to do that to allow for healing and mental health for those children to reconnect with that parent that's the target parent, that judge needs to issue a 90-day disconnect. It doesn't cut off the attachment. The attachment is still there. If we have therapists that can work with those children, then perhaps we can reunite them with both parents. Scars, that's Dwyleen's book, and she talks in there about how parental alienation is cancer, and you have to cut the cancer out in order to get rid of the parental alienation. And typically what's going on is we're just treating the cancer, we're not cutting it out, and so you have to cut that out. And that's a message to the judges out there to deal with the parental alienation. How do they deal with it? You're going to have to make those hard decisions. I put this in here also as 3 kids that aren't with us anymore because mom committed suicide and killed all 3 of those back in 2019. Just another example of the parental alienation. Some solutions: mental health practitioners, make them a part of the divorce process. They belong to the family court. Informative video training for all litigants. If you go up to Connecticut, you can get online and actually see some of the videos that are put out there by the judges. That way the judges don't have to repeat everything all over again. They can make the litigants be required to observe the videos. We need to certify mental health practitioners, lawyers, and judges on PA. And it's just like, my example here would be in order to arrest somebody for DWI, you have to be certified in knowing what alcohol does to a human being. And so there's some requirements there. I think that certification also should occur for our mental health practitioners and lawyers so that they're trained on PA. And again, come back to addressing the violators of the court orders and custody interference. This got to be done with. All right, and thanks. I've listed my email address there. And thanks, Dwayleen, for allowing me to be a part of today's program.
I know that you said you had some resource handouts for anybody that's interested. We'll have those available at childrenfortomorrow.org. We will make sure that those are available. I hope everybody is enjoying themselves so far. I know that I am. Everything is very informative.